So just an unbelievable night for the Florida Panthers as we bring in CBS Sports NHL writer and analyst Pete Blackburn and former Wesleyan goaltender Todd Fuhrman. And the Panthers join an exclusive club, y'all. They're just the 10th team in NHL history to go back-to-back. And we will get to what that means for this franchise. But we have to start with Sam Reinhart. I feel like Edmonton players and fans will have nightmares about this guy for years to come because he had the game winner in Game 7 last year. And then he has 4 goals in the Stanley Cup Final clinching game. Pete, what more can you say about the performance that Sam had when the lights were the brightest?
I mean, with the Florida Panthers, it's always a team thing. But yeah, obviously 4 goals in a clinching game here is a pretty emphatic stamp, and it's easy to forget at this point that Sam Reinhart was kind of a shell of himself heading into this Cup Final. So not the case over the course of this series. He really woke up, and obviously quite an unbelievable final story and final chapter for him here. So a really cool moment for him, but a real team effort for Florida, who over the course of the last 2 games in this series gave Edmonton almost nothing whatsoever. And if you had any doubt about who the best team in the NHL was this season, I think the Panthers answered it pretty emphatically, both in this series but over the course of the entire playoffs as well.
Every round, it looked like Florida was going to run into a team that was poised to be able to push them to the brink. Starting in that opening round series against the Tampa Bay Lightning, a lot of folks had Tampa poised to knock Florida from their perch. Then it appeared when the Florida Maple Leafs had this Florida team down 2-0 that we were going to be talking about Toronto finally being able to get through. That didn't transpire, and here we are again with the Florida Panthers going out, and to Pete's point, proving they are the best team in the league. Sam Reinhart picking up the slack where some of the others left off. And you look at the contributions from that 2014 draft class where Florida has 3 of the 4 players that went in the top 4, all contributing at a very high level. Sergei Bobrovsky answered the bell as well, turning aside every challenge early in this game when you thought Edmonton could generate some chances and maybe be able to garner a little bit of momentum. But there was no doubt whatsoever who the better team was in this series. And you look at it from a historical perspective, guys, there's a reason that Florida ended up leading more than 250 minutes, breaking an NHL all-time record in the Cup Final.
And they did this, Todd, right? Despite finishing 4th in the East, they never had home ice. So I know you talked about historical significance, but what does it mean that they were able to do this when they weren't even considered the best team by record, at least, going into the Stanley Cup playoffs?
First team since the LA Kings to accomplish this feat. And when you look at a veteran group, I know we've said it until we're blue in the face. It just speaks to the pedigree and this team knowing exactly what it was going to take to win 16 games when the stakes were at their highest. Paul Maurice didn't panic throughout the latter portions of the regular season. He prioritized the rest over rust component. And I think it had a lot of people trying to figure out if Florida could just pick up where they left off. But you also look at what this team was able to do at the trade deadline. And I think Bill Zito, as the architect of everything that Florida's been able to accomplish, not just in winning back-to-back cups, but getting to the Stanley Cup Final and coming up short against the Vegas Golden Knights, it gave them the opportunity to figure out where this roster had to improve if they were going to get to the NHL mountaintop. And whether it was Seth Jones coming in from the Blackhawks to kind of fill that role that Florida was looking for an answer all regular season after Brandon Montour signed with Seattle, or bringing in Brad Marchand in the 23rd hour of the trade deadline to give them that grit, the tenacity, that veteran presence that paid tremendous dividends. Like Pete said, it's all hands on deck for Florida, and it's not just the 18 skaters and the 2 goalies that were dressed tonight. It's everyone from the coaching staff, the front office, that's made this possible for Florida to be mentioned in rarefied air.
Yeah, you bring up the lack of home ice throughout these playoffs, and to me, like, it speaks to a bigger thing about the Panthers' culture and the way that they build their team. And, I say this as somebody who loves all 82 games that you get from a team during the regular season, but sometimes the regular season doesn't matter worth a crap, especially when you are the Florida Panthers, who are specifically built for the playoffs. And whether they're playing on home ice or they're playing in an opponent's building, they play the same way each time out. Every single game they go into with the exact same approach, and it's the playoff mentality. It's the belief in their system. It's the belief in every guy that wears the sweater, and just the team mentality. You know, they do not get too high. They do not get too low. They do not need home ice. They do not need anything, and you know, they'll pound you throughout the playoffs. And if they finish wherever they finish in the standings through games 1 through 82, regardless, if they punch a ticket, they're going to make it count, and they have for the last 3 playoffs. That's why they've been in the Stanley Cup Final 3 years in a row, and it's part of the reason why 4 years ago, when they finished as the best team in the regular season and then lost in the first round of the playoffs, they said, we need to change our identity because this will not work in the postseason. That was an extremely bold decision, and here we are 3 years later talking about a dynastic Florida Panthers team.
Yeah, there's no telling how many more Stanley Cup trophies they could win. I know, Todd, you brought up Brad Marchand. When you look at that addition, right, how much did that change the fortunes of the season for the Florida Panthers? Because, as you mentioned, you can't get complacent right after you win a title in any sport, so you have to make moves. But I just want to know, how would you put in perspective the significance that Brad Marchand had on this team to get them back to the Stanley Cup Final and win again?
Oh, it was incredible. I mean, being able to plug a player with his pedigree and what he's accomplished throughout his NHL career in on the third line. You know, Florida was able to roll lines 1, 2, and 3 that most teams would drool over having as their top unit. And you saw the contributions for Marchand when the team needed it most. I mean, I know Sam Bennett comes away winning the Conn Smythe Trophy, but for all intents and purposes, Brad Marchand, in my opinion, was the most valuable member of this Panthers team in the Stanley Cup Final. And if the NHL gave out hardware the same way that we see in the NBA, Brad Marchand would have been the final MVP, given the timely nature of his goals, the little things that he would do. And when Florida looked to fall into a little bit of a lull, they can lean on number 63 to go out there and be able to make all the difference in the world. We saw that on full display in a pivotal Game 5, where he broke the ice early on, you know, with a picture-perfect goal, beating Cal Pickard over his shoulder, and the floodgates kind of opened from there and continued forward. So Bill Zito knew exactly what he was getting in Brad Marchand, and now we can start the speculation. Does Marchand decide to sign as a free agent and try and run it back with Florida, or will he really go out there, test the free agency waters, and try and figure out who will write him the biggest check?
I really think that Marchand will go down as one of the best mercenary hires in hockey history. Obviously, maybe that changes if he re-signs in Florida. I'd be surprised if he does, but I mean, he may be the biggest reason why this team has won the Stanley Cup. And yeah, it's a true team effort and true mentality, and they got contributions up and down the lineup. But, you know, you look at Game 3 in the second round against the Toronto Maple Leafs. If Marchand does not score that overtime winner, and you're talking about a Leafs team that pushes this Florida Panthers to the brink, this could be an entirely different story. And he was the difference in multiple games of the Stanley Cup Final. And not only does he save the Panthers this season and become a massive difference maker and unlock their third line, but also he completely rewrites his own narrative as well, because, you know, midway through this season with the Bruins, he's an aging player with declining production on a really disappointing team. And you're starting to wonder, you know, is this the beginning of the end for Brad Marchand? Instead, he wants to stay in Boston. He can't work out a deal with the Bruins front office, so he does ask for a trade to Florida, and he completely rewrites things. And, you know, he's got a rejuvenated career. He's going to be a very, very sought-after free agent if he makes it to the open market. And he probably made himself upwards of $10 million more this offseason because of the run that he's had with the Florida Panthers. So just an incredible story and an incredible acquisition by the Florida Panthers.
Yeah, it's something we will never forget, the way Brad Marchand put his imprint on this team that had already won a Stanley Cup trophy. Now for the Oilers, heartbreak once again against the same team that they lost to last year. Todd, if you're the Oilers, Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, like, what's going through your mind knowing that you were so close, and this time you played better right from the start, but you still end up with the same result, watching the Panthers hoist the Stanley Cup trophy?
You know, honestly, Chris, watching this series and comparing it to what unfolded last year, it's almost like the Oilers actually took a step back. I mean, they were dominated in this series. And I kind of joked that, yeah, I know you only have to win 4 to win a best-of-7 series, but you can make a legitimate case that the Florida Panthers nearly won 6 games in this particular series. And while the absence of Zach Hyman no doubt loomed large from a grit, tenacity, and secondary scoring perspective for a guy that poured in 16 in last year's Stanley Cup playoffs en route to losing in Game 7 against these same Panthers, there's a lot of soul-searching that's got to go on for the Oilers. And whether it's the contributions that pay dividends further on down the roster in the rounds preceding the Cup Final, Evander Kane, an afterthought. Clearly, the Florida Panthers were able to get under his skin, and he didn't look like a shell of the guy that was able to contribute. This blue line for extended stretches looked completely overmatched. And tonight, you know, early on in this game, Evan Bouchard is poised for a massive payday. But what I've seen from him on the blue line as a true defender leaves major concerns. I mean, Matthias Ekholm reaching for pucks like he's playing in a beer league on a Tuesday night rather than taking the body. I'm not quite sure what the Oilers elect to do to try and bolster their roster. The one area that there's no doubt they're going to have to try and fortify will be in net. I don't think they're going to try and go into the 2025-26 regular season looking to run it back with Stuart Skinner as their true number one. Now, who the goalie is that they decide to bring in that gives them a better chance to make a deep run in the Stanley Cup playoffs remains to be seen. And look, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and I'm not going to break news or anything along those lines. I'll leave it to folks like Pete to speculate. If the Oilers don't sign Connor McDavid this offseason to a long-term deal, you begin to wonder if 97 goes to the open market and has flirtations with other teams if he doesn't believe that this Oilers team gives him the best opportunity to write his name in hockey history.
Yeah, Pete, when you look at this team, right, the Panthers, they're just special, right? We're going to get to you guys in a little bit to talk about the Conn Smythe, but Panthers, they know how to get it done in the Stanley Cup Final. Now, after losing, right, 1996 and then 2023, they get back-to-back Stanley Cup trophies, 2024 and 2025. And coming up, Sam Bennett is your Conn Smythe winner. Leading the league with 15 goals through the postseason. We'll discuss that and more as the Panthers go back-to-back, baby, Stanley Cup champs. With that, we bring back Pete Blackburn and Todd Fuhrman to discuss Sam Bennett winning the Conn Smythe Award for 2025. And Pete, I'll start with you. You feel like he deserved it, right? Or I know Todd mentioned that he felt like Marchand probably should have gotten it, but what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, it was kind of a 1A, 1B situation, a two-man race at the end, Bennett or Marchand, and I would have leaned Bennett for sure. Obviously, the 15 goals, pretty astronomical number, and I think it's fitting that he's the guy who stands out here because, like, he was part of the identity shift for the Florida Panthers when they decided that they could not win as the team that they previously were, and Sam Bennett was a big part of the identity shift, a big part of, we need to be tougher, we need to be nastier, we need to be more built for the playoffs. Sam Bennett, you can say whatever you want about him and some of his antics, some of his dirty plays, but that guy is built for playoff hockey, and he is a leader of this team. And not only did he lead on the ice, I think he led off the ice, and I think that he's just part of that ingrained culture that has been established in Florida. And it's part of the reason why I expect him to stay in Florida for maybe a cheaper number than he could probably command on the open market. He just loves it there. They love him there. And, if he goes somewhere else, the lasting memory of Sam Bennett in a Florida Panthers uniform will be him hoisting the Conn Smythe and Stanley Cup, and that's pretty special for him.
15 goals in 22 playoff games, pretty incredible for a player that's never tallied more than 28 goals during a regular season campaign. I'll take a slightly different approach, and while Sam Bennett, no doubt worthy of when you look at his overall point production and some of the intangibles he brings to the table, I just think it's hard to ignore what Brad Marchand did in the Stanley Cup Final when Florida needed some of those big-time plays, the clutch goals. And while plus-minus, I know, is a stat that's often overlooked now, it's gone the way of the dodo bird. tough to argue with what that third line contributed from start to finish to make this possible for Florida. Marchand finishes at plus 18, and I don't think you can overstate his value enough to what he meant to try and bring all of this together to fill some of those roster spots that Florida had questions about going into that trade deadline. So I have no problem with Sam Bennett winning the Conn Smythe Trophy. He was the heavy odds-on favorite coming into the game tonight at a price tag right around minus $1.80 at FanDuel. But for me, given the time and nature of the goals and when they were scored, I probably would have had Brad Marchand #1 on my ballot if I was given such a choice.
Yeah, now Brad was very clutch. People can argue about, who was more deserving, but at the end of the day, nobody can argue about them being back-to-back Stanley Cup champs. Of course, for, Brad Marchand, he didn't win last year, but Sam Bennett, okay, he's got 2, and they are Stanley Cup champions forever. Now, speaking about Stanley Cup trophy champs, right? Canada's drought of not tasting the Stanley Cup trophy reaches 32 years, Pete. When are we going to see a team from Canada get the job done and end this drought? Because I thought it was going to happen this year, but clearly the Panthers had other ideas.
I also thought it might be this year. It turns out it's not, and it turns out we're still having this conversation, and somebody's got to step up and do it, right? And if the Oilers are going to be that team, I think they need to look themselves in the mirror, and this could be not that they're going to blow it up or anything. This is a team that got close 2 years in a row. Like, there's something there. They're close. I do think this is going to be an interesting offseason for them. There's probably going to be some turnover. The Oilers are still probably the closest team, I would say, barring a real shift over the offseason. They're probably still the team that is closest poised to win the Stanley Cup. And Connor McDavid, the big question will be whether he remains committed to the Oilers beyond this summer. It's going to be a really interesting offseason for Edmonton, and we'll see. But yeah, the Canada Stanley Cup drought is, at this point, it's just kind of a part of the NHL culture, and some people don't want to lose those jokes. I'm one of them, but at some point, it does. You would think it has to come to an end, just not this year.
Yeah, I mean, look, you had a number of Canadian teams make strong inroads this year. We can start with the Winnipeg Jets, who took home the President's Trophy and came up short in their quest against the Dallas Stars. I mean, the Maple Leafs, for all intents and purposes, probably pushed Florida more than any other team this entire postseason. You look at an Ottawa side trending up. The future appears very bright in Montreal. So this ongoing drought, I don't think is going to last in perpetuity. But Pete mentioned Edmonton and what they're going to have to try and figure out. I don't think it'll be as drastic as what Florida went through a few years ago when he referenced the trade that brought Matthew Tkachuk to South Florida in exchange for Jonathan Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar. But clearly this Edmonton team needs more impact players further on down the lineup. And whether it's just a healthy return of Zach Hyman or trying to add something additional on the blue line, I'm not sure what Edmonton needs to do to kind of bridge the gap and take the next step forward, because they have been the best team in the West. You look at some of the teams that they're surrounded by. I mean, Dallas going through a bit of turmoil. We'll see what Vegas does this offseason. The Kings are a team to keep an eye on, knowing that they pushed Edmonton a lot further than anybody else in the Western Conference playoffs this year. But clearly something is missing from this Edmonton Oilers roster. And one thing I will tell you guys, I'm sure Stan Bowman seeing Seth Jones collect that Stanley Cup, not something he would have imagined when he took over as general manager of Edmonton last offseason.
Definitely not. Very well said there, Todd. Now, when you think about people that need to, I guess, improve, or the Oilers need to retool, right? Stuart Skinner is one of those players. And Pete, you tweeted during the game, this has got to be Stuart Skinner's last game with the Oilers. What compelled you to make that tweet in that moment?
Well, I think that third goal that Skinner allowed was just an absolute backbreaker. We were talking during the game, and it felt like next goal was a huge one when it was 2-0 Florida. And Skinner just gives up one of the most offensive goals that I think that I've ever seen Stuart Skinner give up, which is a high bar to clear, but just an absolutely unforgivable goal in that moment. Is just a muffin thrown towards him that he could have gloved and frozen. And I think that that the rest of the Edmonton Oilers were expecting that play to be stopped and be frozen because they stopped playing, and that back-breaking third goal made the difference. And I'm not putting all of this on Stuart Skinner. I really am not. That was the only time this series that I truly had a problem with a goal that Stuart Skinner gave up. But it's part of a bigger picture problem with the Oilers, which is a lack of stability. And we saw it come up, and I think it caught up to them by the end of the Stanley Cup playoffs, where the lack of stability in net and a lack of a constant and consistent presence behind the defense became an issue. And I think it's a bigger picture problem, because I think that you look at their lines and how often they're thrown into a blender, how often we're morning skate watching with Edmonton to see what their lines are going to look like. They need more consistency. You look at what Florida brought to the table, not only this postseason, but in postseasons past, over the past couple of years. The consistency, they come to the rink, they know who they're playing with, they know who their goaltender is, they know what it's going to look like, they know what the approach is, and there's just a lot of topsy-turvy elements that come with the Edmonton Oilers, and I think a big priority this offseason will be addressing the goaltending position, looking for somebody who's going to be able to provide them more stability and provide them more of a reassurance on the back end. And Stuart Skinner might need a fresh start where he can not have so much pressure on him being the guy somewhere else. I think the time has just come. This has run its course, and Stuart Skinner needs to no longer be the Edmonton Oilers' #1 option.
The biggest question, Pete, I think is what the Oilers can look to do to acquire a goalie via trade. Because you go through the list of goalies that are unrestricted free agents, and it's not exactly a beauty pageant when you try and identify some of the names that probably aren't capable of providing that upgrade that Edmonton's in desperate need of. And whether you're looking for a goalie that's going to go out there and steal games, look, this Oilers team is talented enough up and down the roster that I don't think they need a guy like a Patrick Waugh, a Dominic Hasek, Martin Brodeur type. They just need a guy that can come up with a timely save. And unfortunately for them, they weren't able to get that throughout the course of the Stanley Cup Final the same way they were in some of the previous rounds. The one name that always seems to get thrown around in free agency, or I should say as a trade target, of course, is John Gibson in Anaheim. You do wonder about his durability and if they'll be able to make a trade within the division. But there is no doubt in my mind that is priority #1 for this Oilers team, to go out and try and identify someone that gives them that stability that they can lean into, knowing he's going to start game 1 of the playoffs, and should they make a deep run of the final, that he's going to be available for them, because no team that is playing for a Stanley Cup wants to go through this goalie carousel and try to ride the hot hand. It's just not a recipe for success when you're playing a team that's as buttoned up as Florida. And look, Florida's figured out the recipe. You know what you're going to get from them on a night-in, night-out basis. And the reality of it is, it's paid dividends for them in back-to-back postseasons.
This would never happen, but maybe they try and get Sergei Bobrovsky, right? Try to poach him from the Panthers, because he's clearly built for the moment, and he gives you that stability that you were talking about. Todd Fuhrman, Pete Blackburn, we appreciate the time, gentlemen. And so here's a look at some of the key Oilers under contract. Connor McDavid, his contract expires 2026. You got Leon Draisaitl further ahead, 2033. You got Stuart Skinner, 2026. Evander Kane, also in 2026. So they have a lot of things that they need to figure out if they are finally going to be able to get over the hump.
Rats rain down. Lord Stanley staying in South Florida. Last year was greatness. This time it's historic. The Florida Panthers are back-to-back Stanley Cup champions. The Panthers have done it in 6 games. They take down the Edmonton Oilers. The Panthers have gone back-to-back in 24 and 25.
And this is a team that could potentially three-peat as we bring back Pete Blackburn and Todd Fuhrman to discuss their chances, right? And gentlemen, y'all know this. Only 5 teams have been able to three-peat in AHL history. So when you look at next season coming up, I know, we're still supposed to be, in the present moment, but we have to look forward, right, at some point. How difficult do you think it will be for them to three-peat just with everything going on in the current state of hockey? Pete?
It's a pretty tough thing to do. I mean, it's a tough thing to do on any given year, but to do it 3 years in a row, I mean, it's a grind, and they're going to have to instill some self-preservation at some point. But they've got some work ahead of them this summer as well, because there's a big 3 free agent group that we're all looking at. Number 1, Sam Bennett. Number 2, Brad Marchand. Number 3, Aaron Ekblad. 3 pretty big pieces for this group. They're not going to be able to keep all 3 of them, you would assume, unless they're really willing to take some healthy hometown discounts to stay in Florida and keep this thing going. But I mean, the Panthers are built for the playoffs, right? And we saw it during the course of this regular season where they can take their foot off the gas, they can coast a little bit, but when things get started and they get into the dance and they hit the dance floor, they are locked in and they're ready to go. And so, like, if there is a team that has the mentality to be able to pull this off, it might be this group. But I mean, we've seen it happen in teams prior, specifically most recently with the Tampa Bay Lightning, where there does hit a point where playing so much playoff hockey and so much punishing playoff hockey that it does catch up to you, and you can kind of see a team wear it. Whether or not that happens with Florida next year, yet to find out. But I mean, the fact that they've been able to do this for 3 straight years and get as far as they have and endure some of the injuries and key losses that they have at certain points, nothing short of amazing. And this might be one of the most impressive and most dominant playoff teams that we've seen in the modern NHL.
You know, Pete, you mentioned the challenges in free agency. It'll definitely be interesting to see which direction Florida elects to go and how many of those big names they're able to lock up to short-term deals and keep them in Sunrise for the foreseeable future. But you do wonder about the wear and tear, the overall accumulation of games, not just the 82-game regular season grind, but the surplus of playoff games that these guys have put themselves through. I mean, Matthew Tkachuk in his post-game interview saying he tore his adductor muscle off the bone in the Four Nations and was dealing with a hernia that he wasn't sure was going to allow him to return at the start of the playoffs. Now, we can layer in a lot of these Florida Panthers and some of their key contributors being forced into international duty as well, with the Olympic break and representing their colors, whether it's for Team Finland, Team Canada, the list goes on and on. So it'll be so important for Bill Zito and Paul Maurice to develop a game plan to allow these players to rest and recover if a three-peat is in the future. Look, I'm not going to argue with anything this team has been able to accomplish. They'll go into the season as the favorite, as the short shot in the betting markets. Would I be running to the window to try and bet them now 360 some odd days before they hand out the Stanley Cup in 2026? Absolutely not. But like Pete said, just get into the dance and anything is possible for whatever group the Florida Panthers have wearing their sweaters.
And I think what's really important, you guys touched on it earlier, just about the regular season. They don't have to be the best team, right, in their division or their conference. They just need to be playing their best when it comes to the postseason because they know how to get it done in clutch moments. So you build that freshness right, you keep your players fresh. That may lead you to a more likely chance to three-peat. Now, for Connor McDavid, he's just trying to get one. So if he doesn't get a Stanley Cup trophy next year, Pete, what does he do, right? Does he run it back, get a massive extension from the Oilers, or does he try to find another team who can give him a better chance at cementing his legacy as one of the greatest hockey players we've ever seen?
I'll tell you what, if you're an Oilers fan, this is obviously devastating to lose 2 years in a row and get this close. Now they can really start sweating this summer as well, because if Connor McDavid doesn't ink an extension this summer, next year is going to be unbearable, because the pressure that that team is going to face if Connor McDavid heads into a walk year and, knowing that it's on the table that you could lose him if things don't work out for them, that would be a horrible, horrible death by 1,000 cuts, or it could be. I think the most likely outcome is that Connor McDavid signs an extension this summer, knowing how close the Edmonton Oilers have gotten, knowing that Leon Draisaitl, his running partner, is locked up long-term in Edmonton, and just knowing how willing the Oilers are to just hand over the keys to Connor McDavid and kind of allow him to wear the crown in that kingdom, as they probably should if they want to keep him there long-term. Like, I would be surprised if we headed into next regular season with Connor McDavid in his contract situation still up in the air. But I'll tell you what, as a fan of chaos and as a fan of, you know, the highest stakes possible, there's a little bit part of me that's rooting for that to happen.
Pete, don't lie. It's not a little part of you. It's a big part of you hoping that number 97 hasn't signed a long-term extension by the time teams go to camp in the fall. But you're exactly right. I mean, this is an Oilers team that thought Connor McDavid was going to have a chance to ink his name in Stanley Cup lore. Got close last year, wasn't able to get the team over the hump, and this season it appeared that everything was lining up from the slow start against the LA Kings in the opening round to the overtime victory in Game 1 that appeared to have Edmonton off and running to try and get that elusive Stanley Cup victory. But here we are talking about the Edmonton Oilers and how they may have to retool their roster. We know Leon Draisaitl is signed to an extension there. I imagine, much like Pete, that Connor McDavid is going to want to try and do everything he can to secure his legacy and kind of follow in the footsteps of a Mario Lemieux or a Sidney Crosby. But for Oilers fans that have been around for generations, look, they know what it's like to lose a transcendent generational talent and see him not play his career donning one jersey the entire duration. Look no further than the broadcast of this year's Cup Final with Wayne Gretzky. So the sooner the better for Edmonton Oilers fans' peace of mind to make sure Connor McDavid puts pen to paper and they know they can count on him being the key cog and the catalyst in their quest to end that long-standing Canadian drought of bringing a cup back to Canadian soil.
Well, Edmonton fans will be sweating every second until Connor McDavid signs that extension. Todd Fuhrman, Pete Blackburn, thanks so much for the insight, guys. All right, so here's a look at the odds to win next season's Stanley Cup. The Hurricanes are the favorite at plus 700. Not too far behind. The Panthers, back-to-back champs, also tied with the Oilers for the second best odds.